Hello there. I thought we'd do a drawing today. We're in the city of London, in an area called London Bridge. We've just come out of the London Bridge train station with the Shard above it. London's always been a mix of traditional and new development, and here we see a new pedestrianised area called More London Place. And as we walk up this street ahead of us, we can see one of the towers of Tower Bridge. And that's our subject today, on the River Thames, beside all the history of the Tower of London itself and the city, the financial area. It's very interesting to draw something that everybody thinks they know so well. Something you can find on every tourist postcard. And it's important, I think, for a sketcher to treat everything as if they're really unfamiliar, to start by simply walking around, looking from as many different directions as you can. Get a sense of what you want to capture of the character of the structure you're going to draw. I love this moment. I never have a sketchbook. I find sketchbooks very controlling because each page is predetermined. I like to have a portfolio of loose sheets, and then I can choose a sheet, a size and a colour and a texture, a quality that I feel responds well to the subject we're going to be drawing. And I'll always start with just a few basic structural lines in pencil to help me to establish where the drawing sits. I'll never rub any lines out. The lines are always there at the end of the drawing. I don't try to hide anything in this. But especially when you're doing something as complicated proportionately as Tower Bridge is, you kind of benefit from just establishing the volumes. But also importantly, the difference between drawing plein air like this, actually looking at the real building, is that you can make different decisions than you would if you're drawing from a photographic reference of some sort, even one you've taken yourself. And in this case, I'm choosing to accentuate slightly the towers. The towers are actually sort of stumpier than you might think. But when you're in front of them, they feel taller somehow. They feel more elegant in your memory than they do in reality if you were just to draw an architectural proportion. Now I'm starting to draw this differently from the standard line and wash process. I'm starting with a white acrylic pen, and I'm basically defining the outline by creating this white sky. It was a very rainy day. There was lots of mizzle in the air, and I really felt I wanted to draw this expressively, with character and speed, before I got too wet. Now, by the end of the drawing, I felt this process had worked really quite well. I enjoyed the drawing, but while actually creating it, I was very nervous at certain points. I kept moving from the acrylic pens to the Indigraph with the waterproof ink, trying to kind of blend the line and wash and the acrylic pen in a way that felt sometimes as if I was searching for the way forward in the drawing, but not knowing which was the right way to go. The line and wash process is something I'm very familiar with, and to change your technique can be liberating, challenging of course, and sometimes you end up having to throw the drawing away, but there's a joy to discovering something different in yourself simply by changing the process or changing the pen you use. And here we see that I'm really continuing with the line drawing, and I could, to be honest with you, continue the entire drawing to the end, finish every line that was required, but I realised I needed to break up that method slightly. So here you see we're establishing the form again, generate some shadow and a sense of three-dimensional depth, all of which is making me feel more sort of calmer and relaxed, and I'm starting to feel the drawing and it's going to work. And at this moment, I'm kind of relying on the sky to generate the drama and the excitement of the drawing, and everything else I'm just trying to be quite straightforward, representing the architectural detail and some of the complexity. But importantly, I'm trying to simplify the complexity. The tower itself, the towers are very ornate, and I've drawn this before, and you can spend a long time just drawing all the fiddly bits. And so I didn't want to do that. I didn't want this to be a sort of architectural representation. I wanted it to be a characterful drawing and something that felt more fluid. here. Obviously, when you're drawing something as iconic as Tower Bridge, there's lots of people there, and there's lots of people who want to come up and chat to you. And that's one of the pleasures and one of the curses of plein air urban sketching. You can spend as much time chatting to people as you do actually doing the drawing itself. I've been exploring the acrylic markers now for a few weeks. And this is actually the first drawing I completed that has no watercolour in it at all. Everything's in the acrylic marker. Now that does restrict your colour range into how many pens you're prepared to carry with you. But there's also something quite interesting and quite liberating about it. I have to admit, I did enjoy the process. It's like having a restricted palette when you're doing an oil painting. There's something liberating about a lack of choice, which it doesn't make any sense until you actually try it. And you realise it allows you to move faster in your choices. You're no longer spending time, as it were, mixing colours in your mind. You're just going with what's closest and working with it and making it work for you and making it work for the drawing. I'm using a different Indigraph here. I've got a few Indigraphs there, as I say, my favourite fountain pen. And I have one which has a Fude nib, which is a special sort of bent nib, which is used primarily in calligraphy. It's a very wide line, great for outlining and really bringing the line forward and making it heroic on the page. But I'll also use the Pilot Parallel pens, also primarily used in calligraphy. I find them ideal for doing windows. They just create such a wide, this is a 5mm wide line, and it's just an immediate way of giving that sense of the window pane, that darkness that comes through reflections on glass. I really enjoy the speed that brings me. Speed's actually a very important part of my drawing process. I find I can lose interest in a drawing if it takes me too long. So I do need it to have a certain hustle to it. Here we see the weather's really coming in, and there's now spots of rain falling on my paper, which is annoying, but kind of okay because it's part of the moment. The whole point of drawing outside is to not just capture what you see, but what you feel, what you hear, and what's in the air. So there's something okay about a few drops of rain. Obviously you don't want to get soaked though, because that would be kind of a bit counterproductive. In my head, we're into the last phase of the drawing now. I kind of know exactly where it's going to end up. I'm confident the process is worked, and I just need to kind of finish the process. I need to bring in a bit more colour, I need to bring in a bit more definition, but ultimately from this moment on it's kind of downhill. The proportions are okay, the proportions are what I wanted to do, the drama's there, and I think the choice of the grey paper has helped the drawing overall. It fits the colour of the stone, but it also fits the colour of the day, and it just needs some pops. And the tower itself does have a lot of very light blue paintwork on it. This wasn't always the colour scheme for most of its life. If you look at films from the early 70s, for example, you'll see it's a sort of tobacco brown colour, quite an unpleasant brown colour. And in 1977, for the Queen's Jubilee, it was painted blue, and it's remained blue ever since. And that helps my drawing, because that little blue adds happy pops of colour. One of the nice things about drawing on site is you have time to not only look at the subject from all different positions, but also just read up on it to sort of understand it in a more three-dimensional way and a more historical way. So it's not just a fixed image, it's a living thing in front of you. You can end up feeling quite friendly with it. You can feel as if a connection's been made. I think most people would think that Tower Bridge is a very old structure. It looks Gothic, almost like a castle, like something from hundreds of years ago, even something as old as the Tower of London itself. But of course it's actually a modern building, at least in London terms. It was built in the 1890s, and that's obvious really because it's a steel construction bridge, steel but clad in stone. And it's steel because of the lifting portion in the middle. And we're lucky enough today, which is quite a rare thing, to see the bridge lift, although this was only a little stretch, I think. It wasn't having a full lift to let a boat through, it was just having a little wiggle in order to loosen itself up a bit. One of the aspects of urban sketching that you don't hear too much about is the amount of times that you have to look up and look down at your drawing. You end up with a very strong neck, either that or a very sore neck by the end of the day. And that's accentuated when you have a drawing in your lap, as I do here. It's literally a sort of 120-degree sort of stretch your head is doing in order to look up, flick your eyes up, capture detail, look back down, represent that in your drawing. It's much easier if you have a tripod easel where the drawing is vertical, because then there's almost no head movement at all. You can just move your eyes. However, if you're carrying a tripod easel around with you, that's a lot more weight, and it just takes some of the immediacy out of it. I mean, I carry quite a lot of stuff with me, I suppose, but it all fits in a small bag. It's on my back, and it's kind of ignorable when I'm tramping around London looking for something to do. So ultimately, there's a price to be paid, but it's a price I'm willing to pay. I have a strong neck. Here I'm using the same blue colour to represent shadows. They are not represented a painted blue element within the bridge itself. It's merely there to allow that blue colour to stretch out. And now we're pretty much into the final phase, using a very fine line acrylic pen just to kind of bring some sharpness and again a sense of detail. But you don't want those details to attract the eye too much. You want them to again sort of fade away, so there's a certain generalization to them. They just imply laciness without being specific too many ways. To be honest, this is the kind of stage that you could do at any point after you've left the site. I could be doing this in the studio when I get home. It's merely that sense of wanting to be finished. I often feel when I'm working on a drawing that I have finished it. It's only when I get it home, or even maybe the next day, that I look at it and think, actually, that's not quite there yet. But it is nice to feel as if the drawing is done, at least to an extent where you walk away smiling from the site, rather than feel as if you've just started something and there's a lot more to do. So at this stage, I'm just looking up, looking down, thinking what needs to sort of happen. There's sort of highlight details. There's some gold finials here on the top of the tower. I have no gold pen with me, so I'm making a mental note to finish that when I get back to the studio. I'm looking at the sky and thinking it needs a bit more opacity, a bit more sort of solidity to the light, to the whiteness of it. It's a strange quality of light that day, and I wanted to capture that sense of its bright grey, if that makes sense. And that balance of, there was sort of hints of blue coming through, but they were very steely. And so I'm trying to pick that steel up in the colour of the Thames itself, in the reflections in the water. One of the things that is important in this technique where you're using multiple pens is that they all kind of play nicely together. So you want your marker pen to be able to write over the top of your acrylic pen, which you see it does here, but in a slightly different sort of quality to obviously that which it will do onto paper where it's soaking it, so it becomes a lighter finish. And it's good to be able to work with that and to kind of feel comfortable with what the pens are comfortable doing. At this moment, I'm doing a bit of an affectation. There's little blocks of white at the end of some of the highlights in the sky, just to give the lines a sense of finish. I felt there was a little bit of rawness in there, so I kind of fiddled around with a fat pen back into the white lines in order to give it a bit more sense of graphical completeness and sharpening up. And when I took this drawing back to the studio, I did even more of that. But this is the moment where I thought, okay, job done, time for a coffee, and goodbye to Tower Bridge, goodbye to the rain, even though the sun's just starting to come out, and it's just my luck, I was too impatient. And later that day, back in the studio, I'm able to finish off that gold finial on the top with an additional pen, and basically feel as if the drawing has enough finish to it and polish to it that it feels complete. It's an interesting stage, the studio stage, because you do sometimes look at the drawing differently. It's that old thing, you know, when you used to, I don't know, hold a mirror up and see the drawing in reverse and then suddenly see it differently, or take a photograph of your drawing and mirror that and see the drawing differently and suddenly realize where the proportions are slightly wrong, or in this case the tower is slightly too wide. And it can be quite fun just to give yourself a couple of hours of not thinking about the drawing, not looking at the drawing, and then suddenly just look down and say, what's wrong with this? Or how would this improve? And so that last minute fiddling is a nice little sort of additional gift you give to yourself and you give to the drawing. And now it feels done. So if you've listened all the way to the end, thank you. Thank you for putting up with my wobbling old chatter.